Hi, Paul Arnold here, sometimes known as Studying Professor, and today I want to talk to you about techniques in strategic planning, particularly what we do to help develop the proposition when we're looking at comms. But obviously a lot of this stuff also has ramifications outside of that, because the only way we can get to the proposition of the comms is once we've worked out the positioning of the brand overall. Now, I'm trying to compress 30 years experience of doing this stuff into just a 10-minute slot. So I apologize if I rush through some things, but that's why I run workshops on this stuff. Anyway, let's talk about some sort of meta principles first before we get into some more detail. Look, the very heart of what we're trying to do is we're trying to drive the engine of growth, because 99% of the stuff we're doing is about driving growth for a brand. And obviously what we're trying to do is actually work out where that growth lies and with whom it lies. And we're then in between those things trying to look at what's the accelerator we're trying to push to get that brand into new growth. Or often the way is, what's the brake, what's holding people back? And very often we need to make a decision about which of those two pedals do we have to press, because we don't have enough marketing muscle to go and do everything all at the same time. So it therefore leads to this fundamental thing we need to do, which is focus. And we need to basically distill all of this stuff and then direct it into a very clear brief, a very clear proposition and positioning for the brand. And that's why I always talk about, we've got to search the key issue we're really focused on. You know, what is the thing that is going to make the difference? And actually, I think of it almost like a wall, and on the other side of the wall is where our new growth is going to come from. And where's the weak spot? Where's the one bit which, if we put all our marketing focus in that one area, we can really cut through? And that's what we've really got to find. And that's where the real issue is what we're going to be focused on. Now, when I'm doing all this stuff, what I'm really doing is I'm being a bit like an accordion player. You know, in that I'm going out, and then going in, and then going out, and then going in. And basically I've developed a sort of 6-stage process about what we do when we do strategic planning. And there's the first stage we do is we explore, the next we collate, the next we interrogate, the next we decide, then we expand out again, and then we refine and define. So the going out, coming back in, going out, coming back in again. So let's look at the first one, explore. The first thing we do is you've got to almost like look at a lot of different spaces and places to really understand where that brand sits within the complete sort of environmental space of competitors and consumer and all things like that. And that's why we often, talk about, it's almost a bit like the kid who goes to the seaside and found a rock pool, and he's sort of turning over the little stone to try to find the crab. And actually, often when you turn the stones over, there's nothing there. And that's what we're doing. But we've got to look at all this stuff, have the discipline to look at all that stuff to eventually try to find the one or two areas that give us the insight to find the way through. So the first thing we start is what we call the 6 C's and the 1B. And the 1B is the brand. So we've got to really understand the brand, its vision, its values, its purpose, its essence. Looking at the brand pyramid or whatever is the structure that's being used to really get to have a clarity about what that brand is standing for. And then we've got to look at the consumer. We've got to understand, who is our consumer? Who is the future potential consumer? Why do they buy us? What role do we play in their lives? What don't they like about us? What do they like about us? What do they like about other brands? So therefore we've got to look at the competition as well. And then also, when we look at competition, I think it's really important that we don't just look at the immediate competition. Like if you're in breakfast series, it's not just looking at what all brands are doing, but actually to thinking, well, who else has got share of stomach at that time of the day? And also we've got to look at what I call the customer, because very often we're selling through a third party. And we've got to understand, what is the role that our brand, our category plays within them, within their space? And likewise, we've got to look at our company for the very same reason, because very often a brand is owned by a much larger company, and what is the role it sees that brand playing, be it within the Boston Consulting Matrix, is it Cash Cow or whatever, or what other roles it's doing. And we've got to know that, because that helps us understand what is our level of influence. And then we've actually also got to actually look at the category. How's the category doing? Is the category growing? Is the category in decline? And then the last thing we look is culture, and I often use the PESTLE model to when I'm looking at culture, because we've got to look at what are the political influences on the environment we're in, what's the economic issues that are impacting the environment, what's the social issues that are impacting the environment, what's the technological, what's the legal, and what's the environmental. And so that gives us a pretty broad, but we haven't finished going broad yet. We've got to keep going, because what we've got to do is speak to stakeholders. We've got to look at those people inside the organisation, have interviews with them. And then we've got to talk to consumers as well. And also we've got to look at experts, often experts outside. And I also like to also look at some of the experts who are really on the edge of stuff, because they give a sort of angle, a sort of insight that you don't get from other people who are so closely locked in. And then obviously we've then got to look at all the past research, and every organisation has done. So you don't have a pile that high, and we've got to look at it through new eyes and dig through that stuff. So we're still out there, we're still collecting. And then what I often do is I'm often looking at this through a number of different sort of lenses as well, and other different sort of approaches. So I'm going to be looking at this through the consumer journey lens. So, what's the path they're taking? Who influences it? How do they use it? Where do they use it? I want to understand that in a lot of depth. I clearly want to go into insights, and I posted a past video about insights, because insights really lies at the very heart of finding that point of relevance of our brand to meet a much higher need that the consumer has. And then what I'm then going to be doing is look at fundamental human drivers. I've talked about that in the past, because if we can lock ourselves into one of the fundamental needs we have, it's a very powerful place for us to actually leverage our brand strength. And then I want to look at archetypes. I really like what sort of the Jungian approach to sort of personalities and sort of personas of brands, to really understand what is that and what is the role we're sort of playing there. And then obviously, within that, I'm going to look at emotions, because we know from all the work in neuroscience and everything else that actually sort of emotions are one of our primary drivers of behavior. And then I also want to therefore map not only the consumer journey, but I want to map the emotional journey. What are the highs and what are the lows? Because they often become key points that actually we have a clear point of intervention in. And within that, what's the tension points within there? And then I want to sort of look at the purpose. And we talked about the purpose of brand at two levels. The purpose it plays in everyday people's lives and trying to be really useful at that point. But also the purpose of what's the vision? What are we trying to get to? And a lot of this sort of CSR stuff that we're now seeing talked a lot about brands. And then obviously engagement. I really want to get to understand the granularity about where does our brand show up in their lives? Where's the conversation points about? Where are we talked about? And a lot of that so we know what are the points that we can sort of engage in that with them. And I often talk about the task map, and you can extend the task map from sort of what do they currently think about us? What do they currently say about us? Where do they currently say that? What do they feel about us? And what do they do about us? And where do they do that? So we can explore that in a number of different layers. So having done all of that stuff, what I then do is I then sort of really want to explore culture at another level and really dig into that, because we know that we are all hostage to the environment that we live in, and in many ways we've got to have a much closer idea to get that stuff. And then I'll also explore some sort of behavioural economic principles, because I find that's quite useful, and overturning some of that as well as these little stones within the rock pool I talked about. And the final one, and maybe it's one that comes up front, is this idea about interrogate the product until it confesses. Really get to understand that product. Go to the factory, go to the farms, go into the shops where it's being sold. Really sort of live with it, eat it, try it, use it yourself. And it's a very simple exercise I do is, if it is a physical product, I want to hold it. I want to look at it. And what I'll often do is I'll often say, well, what are some things about it? It's in a can, it's da-da-da, and I'll sort of draw a spidergram around it. And I'll think, well, what does that mean? What does that mean? Because actually all of those things, you may find it starts to stimulate new levels of thinking. So that's all the stuff about exploring. Now let's go on the next stage about collating. And collating is when we start to pull this all stuff together. So having done all this looking around, we're now going to make sense of all this stuff. And that's where I often use a mind map, and some people do post-its, or you use a SWOT. One of my other favorite techniques I use is the Brown Axle, because this really locks it down to the three really big major parts that really helps to drive positioning and proposition. And that is, we look at what's the brand truth, and what is the consumer truth, and what's the cultural truth. And often when you look at those three things, you know, there's an answer that lies in the middle of all of those three. And I find that very useful. And then let's not ever ignore the fact about discussion and dialogue is really so powerful. You know, planners, you know, will lose themselves if they just do it by themselves. And we've really got to involve others and talk about this stuff. You know, because they'll see it from a different angle and they'll challenge us and push us. And that's really where the power comes in. You know, and then I think you've always got that, you've got all this stuff, and now you've got to just like let it sort of like put it in the oven and just let it rise by itself. Let it have a period of gestation where you walk away, you go and do something else. And you know what? The good stuff bubbles up, and in the middle of the night you sort of wake up and you think, oh yeah, you know, that's really important. So this is like starting to get us to close down again. You know, we're going in a bit, but we're closing down a bit. And what I then want to go and do is once we close down a bit, we want to look at some of those little ones that we thought, you know, there's something really interesting there. And I think the interesting ones is where there's a seam, a bit like, you know, within the mind, there's a seam. We want to dig down into it. And the more we can dig into it, the more powerful we're going to find stuff. And I think the trouble is that these days we don't give planners enough time to do that stuff, or just noodling away at the problem. And I always say this a bit like a pressure hose. We've got to put a lot of sort of concentrated thought and thinking, you know, into an area, and we've got to, and then if you put that pressure in, you're going to sort of dig down and discover new stuff. And that's what we've got to do. So we've got to get past what I call the already said. So that's the interrogation stage. And then we've got the decide. So eventually we've done all this stuff, we've done some more digging, we've noodled around it, and now we've got to eventually say, okay, where's the area we're going to go for? What is the area? And that's often the most difficult one. You know, and again, I think there's something about, you've got to trust your gut on this stuff, because there's something about, at the end of the day, you've got to sell this into others, and you've got to go with one that you believe most passionate about. If it was your company, what would you do? What do you think is the right one? You know, and just remember that phrase, there's never the right way of doing the wrong thing. You know, so actually we've got to be focused upon, this is the one that I believe is right. And obviously we're going to build the evidence to actually help support that as much as we can. And we're going to talk about testing to destruction in the next video. And obviously at this point, you know, we are going to be involving others as well. You know, there's going to be like sort of either we're going to do some research, and third parties are going to get involved in this stuff. And the other thing about it is, you know, remember there is no just one truth. There is no one way to sell sliced bread. So there is obviously got to be, we've got to just actually nail, you know, the flag to the mast, say this is the one. You know, and often if a client is committed and consistent, that will break through with his own power of consistency. So therefore, having decided, now we've got to go back out again. We've got to expand out again. So now we've decided that we're really interested in owning the pause, about this break time. You know, that seems to be really exciting to us. Well, now we've got to find an angle on that. We've got to make it more interesting. You know, so are we going to, like, shall we say, if it is about this pause, it's about the recharge you get. Is it about the break away from society that we get? Is it that reflective space that allows us to actually contemplate? Is it that space to be in the moment? What is it? And we've got to define that bit and be very clear about that stuff. And then having done that, we can then refine and define it as precisely as possible. So just to recap, we've got to explore, we've got to collate, we've got to interrogate, we've got to decide, we've got to expand, and then refine and define. Anyway, that gives you a quick gander through it all. I hope that's of use. Clearly, I do whole day workshops about this, and if this is of use, then please contact me after this video. I'm going to post a second one about some other sort of particular techniques that I use to also help in that thinking process. Anyway, good hunting. Ciao.